Statements has expired. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Today is the last day of Right to Know Week. I'll bet the Premier and many others will be counting down the hours to the end of today. Yesterday, Canada's privacy watchdog said there is an urgent need for stronger laws to protect personal information. Privacy Commissioner Daniel Theron said, and I quote, and will table, "Respect for those laws must be enforced by a regulator independent from industry and independent from government, with sufficient powers to ensure their compliance." When it comes to privacy laws, Mr. Speaker, the Premier disagrees with all the experts. Why does the Premier refuse to give our Privacy Commissioner the independence and authority everybody but his government agrees she needs to have to do her job?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable for the question. Mr. Speaker, the Privacy Officer makes a number of recommendations across to our government. We continue to accept those and implement the changes, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to work with her to ensure the information she's looking for is out there, at the same time protecting the information of Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, that is their private information.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the disrespect the Premier has shown for transparency in Nova Scotia is astounding. It's disrespect for the Commissioner. And he has gone out of his way to correct me, actually, and other members when we refer to Ms. Tolley as the Privacy Commissioner or the Information and Privacy Commissioner, which is the correct title for her. The annual reports from Mrs. Tolley's office for 2016-17 clearly refer to the office as that of the Information and Privacy Commissioner, not officer. The website refers to the Information and Privacy Commissioner. Why does the Premier use every opportunity to diminish the importance of the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner for Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the office, Mr. Speaker, the Information Officer in this province continues to do her work. We'll continue to comply, Mr. Speaker, when FOIA pops come in. We continue to respond to those. Mr. Speaker, over 82% of those are done in 30 days, the highest recorded in the province, Mr. Speaker. We continue to make sure that we improve that. We have an open data portal, Mr. Speaker. We continue to improve that. We put Cabinet Minister, Executive Council's expenses online for all Nova Scotians to see them, Mr. Speaker. We continue to make sure, and we'll continue to work, that we continue to open up the process for the information that is available to be shared with Nova Scotians. We'll continue to share it.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the contempt this government feels for Nova Scotians has become obvious in the past few weeks in this legislature. Last week, he called his 2013 promise to expand the powers and mandate of the FOIA Commissioner a mistake. That didn't mean anything because it wasn't in his platform. He defended his deputy's refusal to allow an EA to talk to the Privacy Commissioner about a secret email address. His government has attempted to drastically reshape the Public Accounts Committee to avoid scrutiny. Will the Premier admit that he will use every manoeuvre possible to avoid embarrassing scrutiny and real transparency for Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. If she goes back and looks at the FOIA that was submitted by a reporter, Mr. Speaker, she asked for the email addresses in a certain period of time. All of those were turned over to the applicant who asked for that information. Mr. Speaker, that's open and transparent. They have that information. When it comes to the Public Accounts Committee, Mr. Speaker, we've actually put in front of it the Auditor General. I'm not sure why the opposition would actually be the ones to set the agenda instead of letting the Auditor General set the agenda. They talk about independence from government, Mr. Speaker. He clearly is independent from us. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we responded to the requests of opposition parties to create a new committee, Mr. Speaker, on health. Mr. Speaker, how much more open and transparent can you be, Mr. Speaker, than to allow an independent person to set what sits on the record in public accounts and allow the largest budget item to be scrutinized in its own department? Shame on that party, Mr. Speaker, for open and be fighting against open and transparency.
The Honourable Leader of the Official New Democratic Party.
According to a news report published yesterday, which I'll table, the monitoring and reporting of bed sores mandated by the government in June in response to deaths in long-term care has been a short-lived program. The government is no longer requiring the mandatory reporting of stage 1 and stage 2 bed sores. Can the Premier explain why this reporting requirement was discontinued at just the time when we're needing more, not less, information about long-term care in order to address the crisis there?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of categories he's referring to. Mr. Speaker, we asked an independent expert to go out and do an analysis. They were into homes working with their partners, our partners, to be able to ensure that we have the appropriate recording of bed sores in the region, Mr. Speaker, in the province. They put out protocols on how we should report those. She is also part of our panel that is out looking at long-term care, which will be reporting back in the end of November, and I look forward to hearing the recommendations that they bring forward.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
This same news report on nursing home bed sores speaks about, and I'll quote, it speaks about efforts to obtain information on the number of bed sores being, quote, hampered by secrecy. It speaks also about having to file freedom of information requests in order to receive information about nursing homes that in the majority of the rest of the country, information that is available, in fact, online. So I want to ask the Premier to explain what possible purpose is being served by secrecy about nursing homes.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank the Honourable for the questions. You know, Mr. Speaker, we had an expert go out to work with our partners to deal with this very challenging issue. We'll continue to work with them, the guidelines associated around how do we deal and report relationship when it comes to bed sores. I'm also looking at, as he would know, the committee that is out there looking at long-term care will bring back recommendations, Mr. Speaker. We asked them to come back by November 30th. That allows us to take those recommendations, review them, and put them in the budget process. We continue to make investments in ensuring that we can deal and allow that we're providing people with the appropriate care, make sure that we continue to invest not only in long-term care, as we've done in Cape Breton Island with an extra 50 beds, but continue to invest in home care. Many Nova Scotians are telling us they want to continue to live at home as long as possible, and we'll continue to strike that balance.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
The Canadian Institute on Health Information gathers and receives information on a range of incidents in nursing homes, falls and incidents of over-medication, also incidents of bed sores. And in a majority of provinces of Canada, this is something that is done by every nursing home in the entire province. But in our province, the total number of nursing homes that are providing this information to the Institute on Health Information is 1. And so I want to ask the Premier to explain, if we're looking and hoping to improve the quality of care in nursing homes, why is the government not gathering as much data as we can possibly get our hands on in order to address what needs to be improved? The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is exactly, Mr. Speaker, what was happening. It's why we hired an expert in this very issue, Mr. Speaker, to send them into the long-term care facilities to identify why the reporting wasn't happening, why in some cases it was being reported differently, why some bed sores were being ranked differently than others, to make sure that the process was being done properly. And it's why they are part of the committee that is looking at what are the other issues associated with ensuring that we can continue to improve the care that we provide in our long-term care facilities across the province.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rose in question period yesterday on a question about the 2017-2018 FOIPOP annual report and the complete omission of the FOIPOP portal breach in that report. The minister's response from yesterday was that the breach didn't occur in the reporting period, and I found that response a little vexing. So fact 1, by the department's own admission and verified by police, the breach occurred between March 3rd and March 5th of 2018. Fact 2, the report covers the fiscal year from April 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2018. And fact 3, March 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2018 all occur before March 31st, 2018. In order for the minister's response to be accurate, one of these facts must be incorrect. Could the minister identify which one is the erroneous fact?
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I explained to the member yesterday, the activity of the breach took place outside of last year's fiscal period. So it would not be captured in last year's fiscal report, annual report. And also, as I encourage the member to listen to this, and all members, we have been actively engaged with 2 independent bodies who will look at this issue of the breach, a breach that we take very seriously, and make sure that the proper procedures and follow-throughs take place based on those 2 independent reports.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will table a calendar for March 2018, which does show that those dates come before March 31st, 2018, so we can table that. Mr. Speaker, this breach has, the government has chosen not to report the FOIPOP breach, which clearly demonstrates that it occurred within the reporting period. If the breach was detected after the report was published, I could understand the omission, but the breach has been known for about 6 months, and I believe the government is intentionally choosing an interpretation that allows the government to put as much distance as possible between the breach and their obligation to report on it. And I think this interpretation pushes the boundaries of department's obligation to report. Will the minister retract the report and publish a new one that accurately reports the offence of 2017-18?
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And while I appreciate the member's question and his ability to try and teach me how the dates of the month work, I would like to inform him and inform all members that I am putting my trust in the 2 independent reports in regards to this breach, even if that member chooses to disregard them.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Finance. Yesterday, we received a budget update from the Minister and the government. As we all know, there are many factors that can cause budgets to change. The risk currently being watched by the department includes high levels of household debt and related low levels of household spending. I guess average Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, are still waiting for all that economic prosperity to trickle down, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister, can the Minister tell us how the government plans to address the serious issue, Mr. Speaker, of household debt facing many families here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. I would suggest that every member of this House has a concern, a legitimate concern about the ability and our desire to have every Nova Scotian be able to provide for themselves and their families. Our government has demonstrated through a number of different departments our initiatives to try to do that and to try to put more money in the hands of all Nova Scotians, and in particular low-income Nova Scotians who are struggling in some cases to provide for themselves and their families. And some of those programs, as the member would know, would be from finance, some would be from community services, some would be from Service Nova Scotia, and some would be from education. So it certainly is something that we as a government recognize and have taken some initial steps and will continue to take those steps to help those in need.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In keeping with this government's claimed desire to be open and transparent, the budget update included a $36 million appropriation for non-wage corporate initiatives. When pressed about exactly what that meant, Mr. Speaker, department staff explained that it was government's commitment and initiatives that were yet to be announced. So, Mr. Speaker, since it is the final day of Right to Know Week, doesn't the minister think Nova Scotians have the right to know what government is doing with the $36 million of public funding?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member opposite, I would suggest that he may want to hearken back. From the mid-90s on, there has been a line in the budget for restructuring, and we will continue to make sure that we have funds available in a restructuring account so that if and when there is a project that we want to introduce and it has been fully detailed, when that is complete, it will be announced as soon as it is ready, and that member will know as soon as I do. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of TIR. The West Middle River Road was trying to reclaim its fame as one of the worst roads in Atlantic Canada. Years of neglect and Band-Aid solutions have many constituents calling my office wondering when the Minister's Department will finally do the necessary repairs to ensure that the road is properly maintained. They were happy when it was announced that some new blacktop would be laid on the road. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, during the project, the culvert has been washed out, and residents now have to endure a 15 to 20-minute detour while the work takes place. So my question to the Minister, how did pre-work inspection on West Middle River Road miss the compromised condition of the culvert?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member opposite for the question. I'm very pleased to say that, yes, we are doing some significant work in that area, and we do have a slope failure which occur regularly across the province. Are dependent, of course, on weather events, particularly heavy rainfalls, and on coastal areas erosion, and we've certainly taken that into consideration in this instance. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, residents are concerned that this work won't be properly completed because they had asked for that culvert to be replaced before. They're concerned that recent paving going on this is just lipstick. I would like to see a total reclamation of this road to ensure crews will be back in 2 years' time. Winter is approaching and the residents don't want to be facing this detour in the snow because the roads are not ploughed on a regular basis. So my question to the Minister, will he provide the scope and timeline of this very important project for my constituents?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank the member opposite for the question, Mr. Speaker. And yes, former governments had said they're going to do things. This government is doing things. That's right. We're doing things with our road system, and I'm very, very happy to report to the member and to the good people of Middle River that the culvert will be replaced. It will be replaced before the snow flies. We're currently looking for an emergency permit from the Department of Environment to work in the waterway, and we're going to take care of that problem like other governments didn't.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Lands and Forests. Mulberry Beach is a real crown jewel of the Northumberland Strait. It's a very popular tourist and local destination in the summertime. It's just a beautiful beach. It was on the front of the Doers and Dreamers guide at one time, Mr. Speaker. The website claims that there's drinking water at the beach, but often there are signs posted that warn people not to drink the water. My question for the Minister, is the Minister aware of the drinking water problems at Mulberry Beach, and can he speak to the root cause of the problem and the go-forward plan?
The Honourable Minister of Lands and Forestry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for the question. To my knowledge, I don't have that information about the water issues there. It is one of the most popular beaches across the province, which is why the department provides many amenities there that not all beaches have. We have lifeguard services there all summer long. We have amenities such as the washroom facilities, ample parking, and I will look forward to seeing what the reports are in terms of the water, and I'll see if we can remedy that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A former Minister of Natural Resources offered to go for a walk on the beach with my colleague from Pictou Centre. Maybe the current minister will as well. But the beach is a fantastic destination. But the drinking water issue has underscored a different problem, and that issue is there's no food services at the beach. There's nothing really nearby for families and other visitors. To get a bite to eat or a splash to quench the thirst requires a long drive. So over the years, there have been attempts to bring services to the beach. My question for the minister is, what opportunities is the minister looking at, or will the minister consider to bring food services back to Mulberry Beach?
The Honourable Minister of Lands and Forestry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, I already did commit to his colleague, the member for Pictou Centre, to take that walk along the beach, but I'd be happy to join the other member as well. It is an important beach, and in terms of availability for food vendors, there was one last year for the summer season in 2017. Unfortunately, that food vendor did not reapply for this year. But when we put out our tenders this winter for more food services, we hope that there will be someone bidding on that project. I encourage both members, all members from Pictou, to engage their network if they know vendors that are interested in providing that service, to get them to bid on that tender. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation. During the spring session, my colleague from Pictou East and myself questioned the Minister about the junction of the Abercrombie Road and the Trenton Connector in Pictou County and how dangerous this intersection is, and all too often the scene of many and unfortunately fatal accidents. We asked the Minister if his department was considering a roundabout, and the Minister's answer, and I quote, "We did brush cutting in that intersection. We put new signage in, and we will consider looking at that for future improvements," and I can table that. So my question is, can the Minister provide an update regarding further improvements?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. And we are reviewing that particular intersection, as we are in many other instances where we see that the evolution in traffic patterns has resulted in different requirements. That intersection is particularly unique because there's quite a bit of industrial traffic that goes through there, and I believe there has been a recent traffic study done on that, and I'll endeavour to find out where that's at.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
I think the study was done in 2015. During spring estimates, the Minister agreed to meet me in Pictou County to review the Trenton Connector, the Pictou Rotary, and the Westville Road. We were going to spend the day together. In fact, he indicated we should meet before the end of June. The Minister requested I write a formal letter, though, to invite him. So I wrote a letter April 9th, and I'll table that letter, but I had no reply back. I followed up with another letter June 1st and had no reply back. Mr. Speaker, the pain of rejection is overwhelming. So, I just want to know why the Minister keeps standing me up.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much. I thank the member for the question, and I apologize that our schedules weren't able to mesh to be able to keep that engagement. However, Mr. Speaker, I did take the opportunity to go down and visit those intersections, and have had a look at them. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get you in my company, but we'll try and correct that the next time I'm in the area.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Tenants at Park Victoria in the south end of Halifax are experiencing infestations of ants, cockroaches and bedbugs. The few sporadic attempts the landlord has made to get rid of the bedbugs have not been effective, and they have spread to 7 floors. I'm sure the Minister would agree that this is a public health concern, and tenants are frustrated that the landlord has failed again and again to do anything about it. My question for the Minister is, how is he working with other departments to make sure this public health issue is dealt with quickly and doesn't continue to occur?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The work of the Public Health Office and the Chief Medical Officer of Public Health does take place. I rely, Mr. Speaker, extensively on the recommendations and the input provided by the Chief Medical Officer through Public Health. The inspector staff for the Public Health Division, though, is actually part of the Department of Environment now. There was a change that was made back in 2015. So any work that will be done from an inspection and an assessment of situations, as the member would have described, would actually take place by employees within the Department of Health and the Department of Environment.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, my follow-up is for the Minister of Service Nova Scotia. Even though Park Victoria fails again and again to deal with the infestation, its tenants are still paying the same high rent. And at least one tenant has even had their rent increased during the infestation. Some tenants have tried to move out, but there are not many places they can afford to go in Halifax's rental market. So my question is, does the Minister acknowledge that if Nova Scotia had rent control like other provinces, big landlords wouldn't be able to demand increasing rents for decreasing quality?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And certainly with respect to residential tenancies, the Act, the role that Service Nova Scotia has in really brokering relationships and keeping the communications open between tenants and landlords. We talk about a lot of issues, and many of the issues around the state of facilities, of the units that are rented, and all of the things that go along with that relationship between the tenant and the landlord. But, Mr. Speaker, Rent control is not something that's come up in the consultations we have had numerous with respect to this act that we have here before the House now, and all the conversations that we've had over the last year since I've been here. Rent control is not an issue that either side is focused on, and I don't think that's the solution here. But we'll continue to work together, and things like this particular example, these things are unacceptable. So if we have a role to play, we'll certainly do that. Thanks.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like so many of our healthcare facilities, the Strait Richmond Hospital is greatly in need of renovations to modernize the facility. The hospital was built in the early 1980s, and because of its age, it doesn't have accessible washrooms, nor does it have washrooms anywhere in the emergency department. Literally, patients are having to use like a commode if they can't get to the washroom. Patients visiting a surgeon have to first walk through the emergency department, and while donors and the NSHA are committed to providing some money, it's going to be up to the hospital foundation to find the balance of the $2.3 million for the renovations. Does the minister think it's fair to ask the foundation to fundraise that much money for badly needed renovations?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for the question. Indeed, we work with our partners, the Nova Scotia Health Authority and the IWK, to bring forward their prioritized investments for infrastructure and equipment. Mr. Speaker, both in my former role as a finance minister and subsequently now as health minister, have met with representatives of hospital foundations throughout the province. They made a number of requests about the approach that we take as a government when it comes to working on capital campaigns and expectations, how we roll out in partnership with these organizations, capital fundraising. We've made several changes in the last year in line with what we've been asked to do.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, the Strait Richmond Hospital, I'm going to give you some stats. Registrations last year were 28,264, inpatient admissions 609, and when the ER was open, which it wasn't a lot of the time, we had 9,577 emergency admissions. This is an important hospital to our area. The catchment area is not only Cape Breton-Richmond, it's Inverness, it's Guysborough, and it's also actually within the Health Minister's district of Antigonish. I get phone calls from that area as well about how important this hospital is. The private, we have a private donation of $300,000. The hospital foundation is willing to put in $300,000 as well. What is the minister willing to put into a $2.3 million to renovate the Strait Richmond Hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I'm sure the member can appreciate, hospital infrastructure, our healthcare infrastructure throughout the province is very important to all communities, Mr. Speaker. The investments and the sequence of the investments into new infrastructure projects and equipment, we do rely on the health authorities, the IWK and the Nova Scotia Health Authority to bring forward their recommendations and requests for investments, Mr. Speaker. That's how we prioritize. We then move forward with our budget to invest in those projects that we can, and we'll continue to knock projects off that list as we move forward.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation. It's a subject that I've raised in this House through a number of different ministers. The interchange at exit 32 on Highway 103 in Argyle Head. Back in 2016, the good former minister said the intersection mattered and was seen as a priority by the district director. And I'll include the conversation that I had with the minister at that time in debate. And as we sit today, there's been no work done at exit 32, even after 2 years of acknowledging that it was a dangerous intersection that needed work. So my question to the Minister of Transportation, if this intersection was a priority 2 years ago, why hasn't it been improved?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member opposite for the question and for bringing this to my attention. All areas of the province where we have significant traffic implications which involve safety are of great interest to the department. I'll check and see for the member just exactly where that one is at.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
So, Mr. Speaker, you know, we started a long time ago trying to identify the dangerous intersections on the 103 and, of course, in other highways across this province. The exit 32 in Argyle Head, Glenwood, was identified as the top third most dangerous intersection in Nova Scotia, and we acknowledge that. We acknowledge there's problems there. The former minister acknowledged that there were concerns for long-term safety, and I thank the minister for looking at it when he drove by a number of times. The people are looking for a solution. Will the minister please advise the House, or please tell the House, the cost of the short and medium-term fixes, and just let us know when the work can begin?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for the question. On the 103, we're doing significant work, as you, the members are aware, the province is aware, on our twinning aspirations, and we are moving forward with some of the most dangerous pieces of our highway. We don't have this particular intersection as part of that program, but I will undertake to see where it lies in terms of priorities. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Question for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, recently there was question about whether this government was moving away from universal dental coverage for children to only provide the service to those whose families meet an income test, which would seem compassionate. Now, I know this work isn't always the most profitable for dentists, as private dental plans pay more for the work than the government rates, and restless children in the chair sometimes take more time. But think of the money we save in fewer dental surgeries for children whose cavities land them in the emergency room because they have not gotten dental care. The change had been sold based on the idea that dental care was not reaching those most in need. Can the minister confirm whether government made the changes and table a report on emergency dental surgeries for children to see if these statistics are improving?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We haven't made changes to require income testing, Mr. Speaker. What we have done is move forward with increasing the coverage for some services for children. I think relating to not the fillings, but the some fluoride treatments and a couple of other treatments, Mr. Speaker. So in the last round of agreement that we entered into with the Dental Association, that is the moves that we made.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
I'd like to thank the minister for that response, and I do accept his response. I do want to table for the members of the House benefit a news report that referred to a 2015 report that, and I think there was some movement within the department on that matter, but I take the minister's word here today as the current state of affairs. Universal dental care is comparable to universal health care. Who in this legislature would argue against the value of that? Many in health care would suggest that dental care is just as important, and we know that dental issues quickly become broader health problems for those that have them. Can the minister table evidence that this government has been able to increase the number of children getting regular dental care that they need? Because this has been a problem that does need to improve.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last time I gathered some information and was being briefed on the topic, I think one of the things that seemed a little bit challenging was actually awareness, Mr. Speaker, in some areas of the population. So I think it's important for members here to let their communities know that, in fact, there are services for youth to receive dental care. There have been some examples where individuals have come in too late, a little bit older, and some of the decay was greater, requiring surgery, where had they perhaps been seen earlier, it may not have been the case. And at times that those individuals coming into the dentist's office hadn't realized that they could have gotten some preventative care earlier. So again, I encourage all members to let their constituents know that this is a service that is available.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Lands and Forestry. While the minister sits on the Leahy report, irresponsible cuts are still happening in Crown Forests. The most recent proposed cut of note is in Queens County, where there will likely be two-stage clear cuts just adjacent to the border of the Dunraven Bog, which is a wetland of international significance according to the UN. Mr. Speaker, forests take a very long time to grow and very little time to cut down. So my question for the minister is, if he's so committed to ecological forestry, why can't the department shift practices now before more damage is done?
The Honourable Minister of Lands and Forestry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in that proposed harvest plan, there is a combination of some partial cuts and some clear cuts, as I said. And actually, the Leahy report also says that in certain circumstances, clear cuts are the appropriate treatment after looking at the soil conditions and the vegetation types and the site conditions on the ground. Also has positive comments on our forest ecological classification system. But of course, we look forward to looking at the report in earnest and looking at the different science-based systems within the report and looking at the technical papers and the appendices and ensuring that we're incorporating all of those things to ensure that we're obviously looking at managing our forests to promote those mixed species multi-age. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, this hardly seems like an appropriate location for plantation forestry on Crown land. The proposed cut poses real risks to the ecosystem, including depletion of already low soil nutrients, more soil acidification that will result in slower regeneration. And the cuts will also disrupt the connectivity of wildlife habitat, including for the mainland moose. The Leahy report clearly identified that the department should not allow clear cuts adjacent to lands like these. And it also found that the department's policies don't pay adequate attention to wildlife or soil quality. The proposed Queens County cut is another example of why we can't afford to delay changing our practices. So my question for the minister is, when will cuts like these be stopped?
The Honourable Minister of Lands and Forestry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And our integrated resource management team, which includes biologists, continue to look at the pre-treatment assessments proposed. These are proposed cuts, and to my knowledge, they don't abut against the protected land areas. The report did mention areas around where we can have setbacks around protected areas. So we're fully engaged in that process, talking with our Crown license holders. But we also want to acknowledge that this timber will go to support sawmills across the province. It's an important industry and continues to be. It's a $2 billion industry for this province, for this government, and this party is committed to find that balance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Based on the number of stories I've received from concerned constituents, it is clear that the government's response to ambulance wait times is not satisfying to Nova Scotians. A constituent from Queens informed me that it took an ambulance a little over an hour to arrive at her home while her son suffered in excruciating pain. The union representing paramedics knows this is unacceptable and wants the minister to host a healthcare summit to address offloading issues at Nova Scotia emergency departments. My question to the minister is, if this is a reasonable government, will he commit to hosting an event? A simple yes or no.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an area that I've acknowledged needs work to be done. It's work that has begun in this area. Mr. Speaker, there's been a review initiated about EHS services, as well as a program that was implemented about 10 months ago at Dartmouth General. The evaluation of that initiative is being conducted so that we can see the results tangibly, which we anecdotally are aware of. I've heard from paramedics, nurses. I've been to the site, Mr. Speaker. I've heard from healthcare professionals at other sites, Mr. Speaker, who are aware of the positive impacts at Dartmouth General. So we are taking it very seriously and looking at ways to improve the offload of our ambulance services.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, it's great that the minister has listened to paramedics, but it's not enough to hear about it. It's time for him to live it. Experience going to a call and arriving after an hour that the person has called. Experience sitting for hours in hallways of emergency departments waiting to offload your patient. Experience the frustrations that our hardworking paramedics have to go through each and every day. My colleague tabled a letter from the union representing Nova Scotia paramedics affirming the need for the minister to not just talk the talk, but also walk the walk. Mr. Speaker, in keeping with the spirit of the day, talking about walks on the beach and invitations, will the minister take a drive with me to Queens, sign a confidentiality agreement, and join the hard-working paramedics at Queens Base for a full 12-hour shift?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've previously noted, I did spend an afternoon, Mr. Speaker, in an ambulance facility that took me out, Mr. Speaker, to while we're waiting for calls, Mr. Speaker. It did happen to be a day where the call volume was lower than average. I believe an indication that they were getting an average of about 600 calls. At that time, we were at about 400 calls on the day, so it was a slower day. But I was, Mr. Speaker, I guess the advantage of that was when we went into the hospital, there were a couple of paramedics with patients waiting. Gave the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, where we were able to actually have a detailed conversation to hear about their experience, both at that time and other experiences. It's where I was first heard directly from frontline people about the changes that were taking place at Dartmouth General and the benefit of those changes.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Health. There is a shortage of family doctors in Nova Scotia, but international medical graduates, IMGs, struggle to find opportunities to get licensed here. That's a hard pill to swallow for IMGs who have to wait patiently for residency spots while hearing about the 100,000 Nova Scotians without a family doctor. There are many Nova Scotians who went abroad to attend medical school at no expense to the province and want to come home and work closely with their friends and family. So my question to the Minister is, how many international graduates who are Nova Scotian born and raised are presently doing a residency here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but I'll certainly put the inquiry in and provide it to the member. What I can say, though, Mr. Speaker, is that Nova Scotia recognized those challenges, and they recognize the challenges of students who have graduated medical school looking for opportunities for residence. That's why Nova Scotia is the only province in this country who's expanded our residency positions, 10 seats in family medicine and 15 seats in specialty, Mr. Speaker. We are the progressive province in this country, looking to provide opportunities for medical graduates to complete their residency training.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to that information. And I could also recommend a good physiotherapist for the minister where he keeps on patting his own back. Mr. Speaker, this minister believes that if he bills it, doctors will be lining up to call Nova Scotia home. However, Doctors Nova Scotia is on record arguing that Nova Scotia's chronic physician crisis is primarily due to the poor compensation that is given to doctors in this province. With much fanfare, the Nova Scotia government announced 10 residency spaces for medical students. A good move, and I would say that. My question to the minister is this: with the 10 residency spaces just recently announced, how many of those will be available to international medical graduates, Nova Scotians, who want to come back home to provide care in the communities that they grew up in?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure I can answer the question fully in 45 seconds, but I'll do my best. Mr. Speaker, residency... Mr. Speaker,
please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
The residency positions that provinces make available, Mr. Speaker, are part of a national program. We add to the national pool, and it's that program, Mr. Speaker, that identifies and matches the medical student residents to the position. So in that sense, Mr. Speaker, we don't have dedicated residency based upon where people study. However, Mr. Speaker, the Nova Scotia students that are studying at Dalhousie Medical School through the medical program are mostly Nova Scotians. The other thing that's important to note, Mr. Speaker, is about 75% of all residents stay in the province where they train. That's information that was provided to us from MARDOCS, which is the Medical Residents Association here in Nova Scotia. Maritime, sorry, Residents Association.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Transportation. Recently, my constituency office received an email from a concerned citizen in Parisborough about the Parisborough-Abateau Bridge. I will table the photos that they sent in. The lake that once existed seemed to be disappearing. I think that's all. By looking at the pictures over time, it's obvious that the water levels have receded significantly. This is worrisome to the local residents. My question to the Minister of Transportation, is his department responsible for the maintenance of this Abateau Bridge in Parisbro? And if so, when was the last inspection?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I appreciate that. The member brings up a significant matter that faces Nova Scotians. In the province, we have over 90 abattoirs, some of which date back over 100 years. They've been effective, simple solutions to tidal estuaries in the past, but of course, you know, after 100 years, a lot of things get to the end of their best before date. In this particular instance, this one has not been brought to my attention, but we'll take a look at it and see just what the circumstance is. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the response. Just to update, repairs for this infrastructure are scheduled for 2022-23. Constituencies are concerned, as well as am I, that this may be too long for the boaters, swimmers, and the residents in the Parisbro area. The province has been struggling to keep up with the repairs of abattoirs all over, as we have heard in Hantsport and the Causeway in Windsor. I would like to invite the Minister to come visit at Cumberland South and see if we can expedite these repairs for this abattoir. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, and thank the member for the question, and appreciate the invitation. We'll make an effort to accommodate that. And in terms of whose ownership is on the abattoirs, they are a little bit different. In some instances, they are the responsibility of this department. In other instances, they were placed there for agricultural reasons, so we have a mixed arrangement there on them. It's a little bit of a quandary in terms of looking after the responsibility. However, it's our commitment to make sure that we meet the requirement of the residents in these areas and continue to have these as functional pieces of infrastructure in our communities. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Between 2013 and 2017, the total number of child protection referrals across the province increased by almost 1,000. I can table that document. Between 2016 and 2017, applications to the Family Division of the Provincial Court under the Child and Family Services Act increased by 8%. I'll table that. Prior to changes brought in by this government, these numbers were on a downward trend. Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain why there has not been an adequate increase in the number of social workers in the department to correspond to this increase in need?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for the question. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we have been able to move resources around, so then when we find out that there is a spike, and sometimes that happens in an area for one reason or another, that we can actually move social workers in, move managers in to assist in that. What I can tell the honourable member is the number of cases per social worker is well within national guidelines, but I would note that sometimes we have a caseworker who might have a series of complicated cases, and we do take that into account, Mr. Speaker, because sometimes 5 cases can be more work than 15. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, when children are taken into care, there are a number of placement options. These options include foster homes, residential care facilities, and places of safety. Places of safety are hotels or apartments where children are housed when other options are unavailable or inappropriate. Mr. Speaker, will the minister table for this House the number of children housed in hotel rooms over the past year?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I want to thank the honourable member for the question. I would note, Mr. Speaker, that we are in the process of looking at our continuum of care options for children who come into the care of the minister. It is clear to me that upon arriving at the department that this is an issue of some importance, and we expect to have information on this in the near future. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kings North.
My question, Mr. Speaker, is for the Minister of Transportation. Last year, I presented a petition of 300 signatures asking for a speed reduction in Centreville. The speed reduction was implemented everywhere in the community but the road directly in front of the Centreville Park. The stretch of road I'm referring to is Sherman-Belcher Road in the heart of the Kings County hamlet. Like any other park, Centerville Park is a destination for families and children and should have a safer speed limit. My question for the minister is, will the minister heed the petition and lower the speed limit in front of Centerville Park on Sherman Belcher Road?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank Member Ops for the question. I'm beginning to feel like the Minister of Health today. I hear what the I hear what the member is saying, and on the issue of speeds and speed reduction and posted speeds, I can assure the House that there is a lot of science that goes into that. There's a standardized process across the province, and we are actually reviewing some of those at the present time because we are getting a lot of requests from municipal units in particular to adjust speeds depending on traffic patterns that are there. So I will undertake to go back and take a look at that again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. We'll now move on to government business. The Honourable